Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a story that seriously sounds like it was ripped straight out of a Hollywood spy thriller. But the crazy thing is, every single piece of it is entirely true, documented World War II history. As we get into this, I really want you to keep an open mind about how wars are actually fought and won. We usually just think of sheer force, right? Well, today, we're looking at the art of the illusion.
So did rubber tanks fool Hitler's army? Just take a second and really think about that. When you picture Hitler's army, you're picturing one of the most formidable, heavily armed, and fearsome military machines in human history. You picture heavy steel, massive artillery, and just relentless force. And then contrast that image with a rubber tank, something you could practically inflate with a bicycle pump. The very premise sounds absurd, doesn't it? It sounds like a complete joke. But this question sits at the absolute heart of the historical puzzle we're decoding today. How could something so utterly fragile outsmart something so incredibly deadly?
Now, to understand how this is even possible, we got to look at the stakes. World War II was obviously the ultimate high-stakes environment. The fate of the entire world was literally hanging in the balance. Nations were pouring their entire economies into manufacturing real, devastating weapons: bombers, destroyers, artillery shells. The stakes could not possibly be higher. And yet, right in the middle of this catastrophic clash of global superpowers, we see the introduction of completely unlikely tactics. Because when the stakes are that high, you don't just rely on who has the biggest guns. You start looking for any possible advantage, no matter how bizarre or unconventional it might seem on paper.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the narrative takes a really fascinating turn. When we talk about America's secret weapons during World War II, our minds almost automatically jump to massive scientific endeavors or, groundbreaking heavy machinery. But the secret weapon we're focusing on today wasn't made of armor-piercing steel, and it certainly didn't drop from a bomber aircraft. It was something entirely different. Something hidden in plain sight, engineered not to destroy the enemy physically, but to completely dismantle their perception of reality.
Meet the Ghost Army. They were America's secret World War II illusionists who used straight-up deception against the Nazis. And notice that word, ghost. Ghosts are apparitions, right? They appear to be there. They make their presence felt, but when you reach out to touch them, there's nothing but empty air. And that is exactly what this specialized unit was designed to be. They weren't frontline combat infantry meant to engage in firefights. They were master illusionists operating on the grandest, deadliest stage imaginable. Their entire mission was built around the psychological manipulation of the enemy.
And this brilliantly illustrates how they actually pulled it off. They had two primary weapons of illusion. First up, inflatable decoys. We're talking about literal rubber and canvas mock-ups of tanks, artillery, and transport vehicles. I mean, from the sky to an enemy reconnaissance plane, an inflatable rubber tank casts the exact same shadow as a 30-ton steel tank. Second, and this is crucial, fake audio. This is the stroke of absolute genius. An inflatable tank is just a balloon. Actually, scratch that. It's just a giant, obvious target if it's dead silent. But if you pair that visual with massive, powerful speakers blasting the pre-recorded thundering sounds of a real armored division moving into position, the grinding gears, the rumbling engines, the shouts of soldiers, you suddenly have a completely convincing multi-sensory deception.
But, having the tools is one thing. Actually applying them is a whole other ballgame. The objective here was laser-focused: deceiving the Nazis. By perfectly synchronizing those inflatable decoys with the roaring fake audio tracks, the Ghost Army was able to project a phantom force exactly where they wanted Hitler's army to look. They were essentially painting a giant bullseye on an empty field. If the Nazis believed a massive American force was massing in location A, they'd divert their own troops, their own artillery, and their focus away from location B, which is exactly where the actual real Allied forces were preparing to strike. They literally played the enemy's own intelligence gathering against them.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast. On one side of the ledger, you've got real weapons. Lethal, heavy, destructive, costing millions of dollars in precious resources to forge. On the other side, you've got inflatable decoys and fake audio. Basically, just air and sound waves. One relies entirely on physical destruction to achieve its goals. The other relies completely on human psychology, exploiting the simple fact that the enemy will act on what they believe to be true, regardless of physical reality. It's the ultimate triumph of brains over brawn, played out on a global battlefield. So, the crucial point is the result. Thousands of lives. When you execute an illusion so effectively that the enemy fires their heavy artillery at empty rubber balloons or repositions their defenses to guard against literal ghosts, you are actively protecting real, breathing soldiers. Every single Nazi resource wasted on a deception was a resource not being fired at an actual American unit. The sheer scale of this success is just staggering when you consider the terrifying reality of combat. This wasn't just some clever prank. This was a highly strategic operation that yielded a massive, undeniable human dividend.
The ultimate takeaway from our historical sources is this absolute mic drop fact. They succeeded in saving thousands of lives without real weapons. In the middle of the most destructive conflict humanity has ever known, a conflict entirely defined by the horrific power of real weapons, this specialized unit managed to pull off a miracle. They achieved the greatest possible victory a soldier can ask for, bringing thousands of their fellow troops home alive. And they did it without relying on the destructive force of traditional warfare. They did it with canvas, rubber, soundboards, and absolute brilliance.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound question to consider. What is the true power of deception? We've seen today that it isn't just about playing a trick. When it's utilized with strategic precision, deception has the power to neutralize overwhelming force. It has the power to rewrite the battlefield. And most importantly, as the Ghost Army proved against Hitler's army, it has the power to save lives in the darkest of times. It really makes you wonder, in our modern world, where else are the greatest victories being won not by the loudest guns, but by the most convincing illusions? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.